Hello and welcome to the first Redux review I've done for this channel. You might be asking, why are you reviewing this again? You've already done it, you silly Billy. Well, my original review lacked a lot of the detail and polish that I've managed to get recently, so I feel that it's only fair to give some of those old reviews another go. First on the proverbial chopping block is Psycome. I don't necessarily disagree with everything that I said in the original review, but there's a whole lot of ground, both positive and negative, that I didn't cover. And with up to volume 3 now out, I thought it would be the right time to tackle the series again. So, after some more time with Psycome, do I still think it's worth your time, or was I wrong about the whole thing? Kyosuke Kamiya is just an ordinary guy who might get into fights every once in a while, but is otherwise devoted to his beloved sister. When he is suddenly framed for the murder of 12, his precious life falls to pieces and he is thrown into Purgatorium Remedial Academy, a prison school for underage murderers. Surrounded by unhinged students and under the rule of sadistic teachers, Kyosuke will have to outlast his term at the academy under the persona of the warehouse butcher. But to make matters worse, Kyosuke's supposed crime begins to draw the eyes of the academy's fairest killers, whose designs on him can only make surviving his sentence trickier. Psycome is part horror, part rom-com, and its dabblings with that horror aspect are some of its first big draws. It's a delight to watch the rom-com atmosphere come crashing down around Kyosuke and friends. The first volume is dominated by the disturbing threat of severe injury or death, though often in equal amounts there are also plenty of harem rom-com shenanigans to lighten the mood. The resulting tone can be a little messy. One moment it's tense, dark and oppressive, the next it's fluffy and cheerful. Going in, it's better if you take it as being both gritty and whimsical at once, both light and dark at the same time. Misunderstanding its intentions as a series to capture the appeal of a harem comedy in a violent, disturbing atmosphere will leave you frustrated with it. The school comedy side of things does take a while to grow on you. By halfway through volume 2 there are enough supporting characters for the main cast to bounce off of. Even if the series' grittier moments are still more entertaining, the ordinary exploits of its atypical cast are still an enjoyable enough read once you're late into the second volume. Even if the story chooses not to linger constantly on each of its characters' awful position, this is for the best. When a story becomes obsessed with putting its own characters' suffering on display, it becomes a farce to expect the reader to become invested in them. We see an awful lot of Kyosuke, Renko and friends trying to make the most of their predicament and having fun in the process, making every instance of dread and terror hit us harder. To get closer to the meat of the story, it isn't exactly classic literature when it comes to using symbolism. Renko's mask is a very heavy-handed symbol. Anyone could tell you what it's supposed to represent. Although at least the idea of masking one's true intentions carries across the series and is applicable to a wide variety of characters. It allows the audience to... Wait, what? There's a theme of acceptance in the first volume that feels kinda misplaced. I can understand it in an accept people for who they are even if they'd rather be different way for characters like Mina. But the series tries to apply this to Renko too, who is perfectly happy with her murdering self. It doesn't make sense as a moral. A more relevant moral to place at the core of the story would be that people can change and that you should always give them that chance. This is vaguely existent in the first volume and thankfully it seems to grab the spotlight in the third volume's conclusion. Speaking of which, volume 3 is when the series really comes into its own. You need time for the cast to properly grow on you, and by the end of volume 2 you stop looking at them like they're just a bunch of light novel tropes. You start to connect with them properly because they've had a chance to really mingle with each other and show the different facets that make them individuals. The cast has great chemistry, and you can tell the difference between when bickering is critical to a character's relationship with another character, or when it's just friends being friends. Those friends can have some real, genuine, heartfelt moments between each other too. These moments make for a really endearing cast once you get to know them well. Volume 2 is a hurdle to leap over in that respect. Like it's trying to drag your enthusiasm for light novels out back and blow its brains out over the ground, turning over to the backyard wildlife for nutrition. Although I feel this may be in part due to the amount of questions the first volume raises, and then goes ahead and answers most of them, leaving the second volume without any intrigue. It wastes a lot of time on rom-com shenanigans that aren't funny or charming yet, and puts horror on the back bench for most of the time. Each volume throws a brand new problem at the cast. It just so happens the second volume's big conflict is with a new character who needs to be developed into a threat. Getting over that hurdle is rewarding though, as volume 3 marks the point in the series where the world of Psycome starts to feel truly alive. Ironically, this is because the world building and additional characters from the second volume begin to gel properly with the setting. Volume 2 took us away from the academy slightly to introduce all these things, and only when we see these elements reapplied to the academy did they start to feel natural. Psycome's best aspect is its characters, but to start with the main character, Kyosuke is really inconsistent. He's first introduced as an average Joe, and then he's introduced as a power fantasy hero, and then he's introduced as a Mr. Sister complex. We're told that these outward appearances come together to make up his personality, but we aren't shown it, so it doesn't settle in our mental picture of him. If we'd seen him trying to act normal, but breaking out of that persona to defend his sister Ayaka with violence, then we'd believe that he holds values like family and justice dear. But because we just get a blurb telling us that he does, it doesn't sink in and his personality doesn't emerge. And even putting aside all previous history, he can be way too easy on people who do terrible things, including attempted murder. This isn't to say that he's necessarily a bad protagonist. His growing attraction to Renko is one of the few things I'd call entertaining about him. As much as he wants to distance himself from Renko romantically, he can't stop himself from being attracted to her. In Volume 3, he gets a lot more in the way of development, forced to choose between his hostile sister and his trusted friends. We do end up seeing how important Ayaka is to him, and upon proving his devotion to us, the reader, his personality finally materialises. It isn't anything brilliant, but it's still a breath of relatively fresh air as far as rom-com protagonists go. Renko is Psycome's resident femme fatale, as beautiful as she is deadly. Although she really has no reason to be in love with Kyosuke in particular, her two-sided character more than makes up for it. Renko's affection for Kyosuke does come from a very understandable human place of curiosity, especially considering Renko's backstory. It is fully explained at least, and not forced upon us like many other harem romances are. The abstract game of tug of war that goes on between her displays of affection and Kyosuke's will to survive is entertaining, and as those feelings for her develop, we feel the conflict in those emotions. It's great to see that Renko has some development beyond her attraction to Kyosuke too, including her own group of friends and an endeared notoriety among her classmates. Her backstory is a little overblown, pushing on your suspension of disbelief and leaving you with more questions, though it appears the author, Mizuki Mizushiro, fully intends to answer these questions in time. As a flagship love interest, Renko brings lots of unique elements to a role that is usually stagnant. Time to move on to the other love interests. Airi is Psycome's tsundere, because every single romance needs one, am I right? She's cool enough, but she isn't a twist on the trope, she just embodies it. Although a relatively early plot twist makes her a more interesting character who Kyosuke can relate to in a way. She very suddenly becomes a love interest in the second volume. I mean, there's no setup. The second volume starts and she is just aggressively in love with Kyosuke, but the latter half of volume 2 and 3 do provide her with a lot more character than she had at first. She obtains more traits than what was assigned to her initially as an archetype. Another love interest, Mina is an annoyingly goofy character at first. She has an interesting, but nevertheless overblown backstory. The series could have done without her, but she does serve well as Kyosuke's replacement for Ayaka, a person he strives to protect. When the cast start to gel together in the second volume, she stops being so annoying and actually becomes a great character within the volume's events. She is the first character to actually change for the better, and while she still isn't quite there yet, her newfound determination is endearing. Shamaya, otherwise known as the Killer Queen.
She's a killer queen, got body agility, dynamite with a laser beam.
Shamaya is a good interpretation of the polite girl archetype, the kind of character who behaves like she's preened and perfect, only for her flaws to shine through in the odd fit of rage. This manifests itself in Psycome's own way, creating a character who is entertaining right off the bat and who helps hold your attention during the volume 2 slump. It's like throwing rocks at a hornet's nest. You're going to get stung, but you don't know how many rocks it's going to take. After settling into the regular cast, she makes for a welcome addition to what is already an entertaining group of characters. Ayaka is Kyosuke's obsessed little sister.
Fuck me, daddy, till my face falls off!
She serves as Kyosuke's last tether to the outside world, and if there's anything exciting about this series, it's seeing those vestiges of hope being torn away. She is a major character in Kyosuke's life, and as a result, her separation from him gives her an influence on the story, even while absent from it. She eventually returns to the story in full-on Psycome fashion, but also in a way that is flaccid for this series. Fortunately, her character is a prime example of what is good about this series, a classic trope turned delightfully psycho. As I said before, Mizushiro is very good with the horror genre, even when the atmosphere preceding it reeks of rom-com. When the police come to Kyosuke's door to take him away, you get the sense of dread and the lack of control that Kyosuke is feeling. When homeroom teacher Kuromiya asserts her dominance over the class for the first time, we at once revel in and feel disgusted by the amount of pain she inflicts on the class problem child. In a specific instance of horror, we are spared just enough detail that we're left to fill in the gaps, and imagination is a powerful tool in the genre. Often what we never see is scarier than what we do. Though Mizushiro's writing is still full of flaws, his style coming too close to stage directions at times. There's such a thing as being too descriptive, especially when bringing a new character into a scene. They often end up being described to us again in an attempt to make their entrance dramatic, but it always backfires. When we know who a character is and what they look like, it's a waste of our time to start re-describing them. I can understand it between volumes, there's a lot of light novels to read out there and it's easy to forget the details, but not when it's only between chapters. There's also a tendency to dip into melodrama on occasion. It becomes kinda silly, but sometimes the tone-shattering melodrama is in itself ironically enjoyable. Coming along with that melodrama is a lot of obnoxious repetition and elongated syllables that are not good writing tools, but end up being used constantly. Despite all the bad I'm pointing out about Mizushiro's writing, I don't think it's necessarily bad. It might be a bit wasteful and chew the page a little, but none of it fails to get the point across. One of the best things about his writing is the bias he places on Renko, giving us the impression that Kyosuke is genuinely attracted to her, more so than the others. We can't see Kyosuke choosing anybody over Renko, and this works in Psychome's favour. Though most of Renko's dialogue from moment 1 comes off as unrealistically flirtatious, the first volume's big twist piles a few more layers on top. Among that dialogue is a slightly annoying fascination with her own big breasts. Boob talk becomes an all too frequent feature of interactions between the girls. Girls don't behave like this, at least not in front of guys, and surely not on such a frequent basis as these characters do. It starts out tolerably but rapidly becomes annoying. Surely people living in a prison school for killers have more to talk about than how awesome their tits are. My last complaint has little to do with the writing and more to do with the formatting. These novels are divided into chapters as most novels are, but Psycome doesn't have enough of them. It absolutely kills the pacing because each chapter is a dedication of more than an hour of your day. Some people don't have that much time, they could be reading on the train to work, and for those purposes a novel like Kizumonogatari with 18 chapters would be ideal. Compared to Psycome Volume 1's 5 chapters, not counting the brief prologue and epilogues, Kizumonogatari reads extremely well. Meanwhile, Psycome crams multiple scenes that could have been chapters unto themselves into one chapter. It even uses divides mid-chapter like this, where you could easily have the start of a new chapter. Although Volume 3 does improve on the chaptering department with a count of 6, that actually does improve the pacing considerably. The artist behind the illustrations for Psycome goes by Namini, and here he has a setting and a cast of characters that must be a joy to draw, though none of it seems to inspire him. Putting aside the fact that he can't draw consistently to save himself, the harsh, violent nature of the setting is lost on the artwork. This glorified prison is drawn like a regular school, just with a bit more grey. Namini's style between the colour art and the monochrome art is different, and the characters like Kyosuke and Mina with bland designs end up looking different between colour and monochrome as a result. With the sparse nature of illustrations in a light novel, it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that any illustrated moments are the story's most significant images. For the most part, Namini holds to this concept, but too many illustrations choose to instead focus on details of scenes that are not too important, or characters that Namini just wants another chance to draw. Illustrations in Psycome aren't used as a storytelling tool, they're used as superfluous flavour. The good thing about this artist is that he does make sure to capture the details that are specified by the writing in his illustrations. Details like the way a character holds a weapon are paid attention to and represented in the art, and the complexity of some character designs are not undermined. The character designs are not necessarily good, they tell you nothing about the characters themselves, but they're reasonably diverse. The biggest problem with these illustrations are that they feel very static and cluttered. His colour illustrations are good, the issue lies with Namini's monochrome illustrations. To explain what's wrong with them, I want to sidetrack and talk about Shinichiro Otsuka's illustrations for ReZero. Otsuka looks at the image the way an animator looks at a single frame, assigning everything in the drawing a hierarchy in the same way the animator looks at his layers. From front to back, Otsuka draws everything within the scene, adding more detail in the foreground, and gradually less to objects as they distance themselves from the focal characters or objects. ReZero's illustrations are very creative and amazing at drawing your eye, using the area of the page like a director uses the composition of a shot to lend meaning and context to a drawing. Namini, on the other hand, renders every single character the focus, and several objects around them, like desks for example, in the same level of detail. He doesn't draw everything in the frame like Otsuka does, and just drawing a few things to convey the character's surroundings would be reasonable. even maybe make for good illustrations. But Namine doesn't draw these objects to convey the setting, because many backgrounds are often left blank. His drawings don't use the rules of image composition at all, and therefore do not draw the eye or add anything to our perception of a scene. As I said before, they are superfluous. If you were to ask me if Psycome is a good light novel series, then I would say no. But if you were to ask me if I was a fan of Psycome, then I would say yes. It carries a tired rom-com format on the back of a unique horror setting. In a world jam-packed with unoriginal light novel adaptations, it's a real shame Psycome hasn't become an anime or even just a manga. Mizuki Mizushiro feels the same way, and explained to me on Twitter. Let me just... Thank you for enjoying Psycome. Unfortunately, Psycome was not a multimedia project consisting of anime and manga, but it did become a stage musical. I also hope Psycome will become more popular, becoming an anime or a manga someday. How many light novels can you count that have never been properly adapted, and yet have made it into the English-speaking market anyway? When you consider this, it's amazing that Psycome was released in English to begin with. And as much as I've been dissing his writing, Mizushiro, who is now 2 light novel series ahead of Psycome, went to the trouble of sharing his enthusiasm for his work with a reader from a foreign country. He even went to the trouble of translating his own response before sending it. How many successful writers cared this much about past work and the people who enjoy it? I wouldn't call it a great series, but it is definitely a one-of-a-kind work by a writer who really cares about it, and is worth a shot on that merit alone. If you like the concept, and you get a kick out of the odd harem series, then go ahead and try it. I'd be surprised if Psycome disappointed the rom-com connoisseur. Volumes 1 to 3 of Psycome are available in paperback from Yen Press's Yen On imprint. They are also available digitally on Amazon's Kindle service. If you like the rom-com angle and want more, then I'd throw you in the direction of My Youth Romantic Comedy Is Going Wrong As Expected, or NOCOM for short. It's the exact kind of story that Psycome puts its dark spin on, the cheerful teenage harem rom-com. Or if you're a light novel tropes veteran and appreciated Psycome's darker approach, then you might want to check out ReZero. Its pitch black take on several parallel world tropes is sure to entertain. Hopefully one of these will be to your liking. If you liked the video and wanted to see more, then make sure to subscribe, or follow me on Twitter for the latest updates. Click the annotation on screen to see my last video. Until next time, cheerio.